recently that was discovered in the Dabbleverse, where you finally decided, you're like, you know what? Stuttering John is not a good friend. He's an asshole. And I'm really enjoying all of this content. And you called it out. You talked about who are these podcasts, Uncle Rico, Steel Toe, Radio Gunk, Anthony Cumia, Chrissy Mayer. Like, you put it out there. Like, I'm enjoying all of this content.
I love all.
Yeah, about Stuttering John. And now you've been very quiet about this, and you finally decided, you know what? I worked with this guy for many years. You were a producer on the Howard Stern Show for many years, while the co-screener John Melendez was there. And I loved what you put out as a video, and I wanted to talk to you about it because John loves to brag about all of his accomplishments, as we know, and he loves to talk about how he was a writer on the Howard Stern Show.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And who would know better about what John actually contributed than Casey Armstrong to the Howard Stern Show? So talk to me about that lie that John was a writer.
Okay, all right. So Carl, it's like exactly what you said. It is. I'm enjoying it so much that I see all the things that he says about me. And enough of that. Let me just answer your question. He had 2 jobs, right? One was to sit, and when people would call in, he would say, "What do you want to talk to Howard about?" Put them on hold, and right up on the screen, line 17, Joe wants to talk about Woodstock '99, something like that, going way back.
I didn't know how to use Lotus Notes.
25 years ago, whatever. And Howard would see that in his console. So every once in a while, John would write something up there, and like half the time, Howard would get mad. Why is John writing me notes? But on a slim chance he got one of his things in or something like that, his hands would go up. You would think that, somebody sort of touched that. I wrote that. I did that. But it was frequent. It was infrequent, and it never really happened. So to be a writer on the show, that's not a accurate description of what he did.
The way you just described that is important to point out because we've been reading John's book or listening to his audio book, and we've obviously listened to a lot of his content on his show. And according to John, it was his job to not only be the co-screener, but to write those jokes to Howard and to feed Howard these lines that were going to crush and kill, and how often that happened, that he considered himself a writer on that. And you're telling me that Howard told him not to do that.
Right, he got in trouble a lot, and it was so funny because all the interns are in the same room, and Will's there, and Jason, and I'm at my computer. Gary's in his little cubicle thing there, and then when Howard would start yelling at John just had this defeated look on his face, like not what he wants you to see, because John is very consumed with how he appears, especially to interns who he'll never speak to again in 2 months.
Right. Yeah. Now, you made an observation, and I don't want to just rehash everything that was in your video. People should check that out. What's your YouTube channel, Casey?
Oh, thanks, buddy. It's just Casey Armstrong, and I just started a YouTube channel, so if you give me one of those subscribes, I really appreciate it.
Yes. So people should check out that video and subscribe to Casey's channel, because you talked about the fact that when John was participating in writing the questions for celebrities, he had fewer of his questions make it to the final cut than the interns on the show.
And Carl, that's if he attempted to write questions. Most of the time, he didn't even try.
He was lazy.
He was never on the Lotus Notes, and that's how everyone, even the interns, were on that to contribute to the show. But John thought his contribution was to show up 5 minutes late, have an intern fill in for him, getting calls up on the computer, and telling on somebody or tattling. Scott went to the bathroom, he didn't wash his hands, and go and tell Howard if there was a time during a commercial or something like that. But that was his way of producing. Come on, Carl. That's what a producer does.
Well,
they don't stay until 3 o'clock. They don't call publicists. They don't cut tape. I remember one time, this is great, Carl, just to stick it up his ass, he's just standing there, me and Gary during a commercial, or telling Howard, or asking him if he wants to go this way or that way. And I had a reel. This was back when we used reels.
Yep.
And just to stick it up his ass, I go, hey, I got to go over this one more thing. John, can you rack this reel up on reel 2? And give it to him, and he's just standing there. He didn't know how to do it.
Yeah.
So he just goes over there and just kind of looks at it. And I made up some excuse or something like that, but he didn't know anything that a producer does. Like, he didn't know what, this is way back, a cart was, a Bernoulli disc, like a reel-to-reel, how to cut tape. I mean, we were all taught how to do this to be a producer at the biggest show ever. You know, you would, if you didn't know it, you would ask someone and you would learn.
I was just going to say, like, you'd want to learn those things. If somebody said, "Hey, can you set this up for us?" and you haven't done it before, I'd be like, "Oh, show me how." I'd love to be able to do that for you. But John, with his stupid ego, thinking that he's the star of the show, thinks he's above all of that, and that's why KC was a producer and had the role that he did on the show, and why John was the phone screener.
Yeah, and that's why Hale Sparks has to come to your house and set up your fucking podcast.
To this day.
No idea what the fuck you're doing.
Oh, I have to ask you this, too, because this was kind of funny, one of the things that you said. So you just brought this up a second ago about how, like, he would get an intern to fill in for him screening phone calls, and he would go take a shit for, like, an hour in the bathroom.
Yeah. That's totally true.
Of course it is. Shitting at work, am I right, people? It's the worst. The worst thing you can do.
But that just shows you. I mean, there was never a problem. Like, oh my God, what are we going to do? John's not here. The part of the team isn't here. No, you just get an intern who's been here for 2 weeks to ask people what they want to talk to Howard about. Pretty simple.
The linchpin of the show is taking a shit
Yeah,
for an hour.
what do you do?
How do we go on?
Well, John wouldn't wash his hands.
Melrose Green is on
Howard made a
line
point of
7. Oh, I
saying
guess
that.
we figured it out.
That's
All right,
right.
well,
He
there
came
you
up
go.
with the
Wasn't
underwear
that
to die.
difficult
And
after
Carl,
all.
that was the thing too. Like, because those commercial breaks were like 7 to 9 minutes.
People are
back
trying to
then,
do
and
a
even
pre and
longer.
strike.
And Gary was number one, because I worked for Gary. But so Gary would go over what he's got going on. He's got a bit or whatever. And then it was my turn, so I go over, like, I pull some tape from comedians, or I had an idea for a bit or something, whatever it was. And then sometimes there'd be a couple seconds left, and John would just be sitting there, just standing back there, because he had no idea what we were doing.
Right.
He had no contribution to it at all, unless he was kind of telling somebody. But it'd be so funny. Right before the commercial, and after me and Gary did our thing, Gary would be like, "Why are you here?" And then John would be like, "Jeff the Drunk is on line 3."
So John was on the Stern Show for 16 years. He started as an intern. I believe screening phone calls was one of the first jobs they gave him, if I'm not mistaken, because there was a small crew back then. So,
And Carl, he even said that that's how he would produce the show, with the calls that came in.
right.
Or if they give him some information that he could use in his personal life.
That's not producing a show. That's screening phone calls. It's very different.
Yeah.
I know. I like that he pretends now that he discovered Jeff the Drunk. He likes to talk about all these people like that he's responsible for. He's like, no, Jeff the Drunk called into the Howard Stern Show. You're just the guy who said hello.
Yeah.
Stern Show.
He's calling to talk to Howard.
Yeah, you didn't discover it. If someone calls you because you work at a show, you didn't discover them. That's how that works at all, you moron.
Yeah, and he would do what Howard referred to as the John Show in the office,
Yes.
where he would make up weird voices when people would call him, "What would you like to talk to Howard about?" Something like that, so he'd try and get the interns to laugh at him doing the John Show, as Howard said. He goes, "I don't need that. I need you to answer the phone. I don't need you to, put on the show for the interns, And that was a bone of contention. The John Show that went on. He would never do it if Gary was in his office. He would just do it if he knew the coast was clear. If Gary was on air, then John could be doing the John Show and getting the accolades. From
I remember Howard dressing him down and on air saying, John, you're doing the John Show out in the hall. You got to stop it. You're distracting everybody.
Also
They-
call him the hero of the
Do your
stupid.
work. And what's interesting about that, I don't know if you saw this, but John had a writer from The Tonight Show. It was his coworker. He had him on Beer on the Balcony. And that coworker lost his job, unfortunately, after a year. But when they brought him in to tell him they had to let him go, they're like, what we like about you is that you're quiet and you do your work. You're not one of these guys who's out in the hall running your own show and trying to be the center of attention. And John goes, that was me! It's like, yeah, did you hear what he just said? The bosses hated that. They appreciated this guy didn't do that. John never understood, even though Howard told him not to do it, and Gary hated it, and Leno hated it, he never figured it out. It's like, this isn't your show, asshole. You just work here.
Totally, Carl. And that is, if you watch, John's ego is, it comes out, it shines when he goes in the studio because he can say anything he wants to anybody.
Right.
Tom, Gary called me a pussy. I don't know how we got through that because, I mean, my old man was a gym teacher. If somebody calls you a pussy, I mean, I wasn't used to that, but I took it. And during a break, he thought everything was cool, and he came in. I think they had the e-show where they show it, like he thinks that we're okay after he just called another man a pussy. And I'm so glad that I think it was Ronnie who talked me down because I'm like, I'm gonna fuck this guy up. I mean, when it's over, but he's like, yeah, you're gonna lose your job, and I would leave that to my own devices to ruin that and lose my job in my own way years later.
Right. And I'll say this for you, Casey, is you're a pretty big guy, especially back then. And the last thing I'd be calling you is a pussy if I were Stuttering John Melendez.
No, but it was that time on the air. He's like, come on, what are you going to do? And that goes to a different level. You can goof on somebody. That's what the show's about, and you should be in a free.
And most people don't realize John is a midget. He's 5'5" at best,
physically
and
attack
he's
you. But
rotund.
it's a
He
difference
looks even
between
shorter.
goof on
His
somebody
head is
and saying,
huge.
come on, what are you going to do? You're a pussy.
Yeah.
That I didn't take well, but I got through it, Carl.
Well, you pointed out something else, and hold on to your thought for a second there. That, he would tattle on everyone. That was one of his jobs there. And Scott Salem, like, oh, he didn't wash his hands. Now he's got to yell or run and tell Howard that. Are you surprised at how John pretends that him and Scott are best buds now? Because I'm sure you've seen this thing where he stays with Scott down in Florida, and they're on the shows together, and they're talking like they're old time pals. Like they hated each other, especially Scott hated John.
Yeah, he did. And Carl, John has one type of relationship, and that's a transactional relationship.
Yes.
It's what can you do for me, and if you can't, I won't even acknowledge you. I might not even look at you, but if you can do something for me, we can be friends. And or if you can support my ego, where I talk about myself, and you can say, "Oh yeah, John, you were the best. You did so much, and you were ahead of your time, and you were a big celebrity." Like I saw something when you guys just put out. By the way, it's so entertaining. You guys do such a great job. You and your team.
Thank you.
Everybody that we talked about before. Cumia, oh my God, he is genius. Did you see when he gave his rebuttal to John? I think it's like. It was like an hour.
I've watched it twice.
Yeah.
I mean, I have it
It's like a
memorized.
song you like, Carl. You keep playing it.
Yeah. No, I've watched that a bunch
Anthony
of times.
blasts
It's fucking
John.
hilarious.
And holds no
And
nothing back.
we got to talk about one time is that my friend Mike went to that infamous show where John comes in blazing, where he's, I'm used to the Tonight Show. You want $20 for beer or something like that. Remember that one I'm talking about? You guys did a great one.
Of course, yeah. That was the Anthony and Artie show. That was when John went on with Anthony and Artie. Artie was 20 minutes late, and John got destroyed for 60 minutes and then took his ball and went home.
Did you know that Mike drove in there and was there for that whole thing? So that's somebody that
I've
that you should
communicated with Mike behind the scenes, yeah. I'm very familiar with that. That guy's got some stories to tell.
And you know how it started, Carl? It started when Mike drove from Long Island, picked him and his brother up, I think, drove into the city, and when they get to Cumia's place, John goes, I'm going to get out. You go out and find parking.
Yeah.
Let him go out, and it's like he was a chauffeur to this guy, and was supposed to be his friend.
Oh, he treated him like shit the whole weekend. Yeah.
Transactional relationship.
Yep. Well, that was the I don't know if it was the same weekend or not, but that was the famous poker game where he made him go get money for John so he could buy back in.
Yeah, John lost
You
on the
gotta go to the
poker
ATM.
game.
You have to play cards with them
He
again.
didn't have any money. He asked
Yeah, I
Mike
don't
to go to
blame
his
you, as you
ATM.
should.
Take him to an
Andy, did you
ATM.
get a question?
Oh, no, I was just going to
But
bring
he
up the
was-
fact
wanted to use
when he
Mike's
was
money.
Trying to egg you into just like calling you a pussy.
Yeah.
It just seemed like he was trying to manufacture one of those meltdowns, like Fred flipping out, or one of the cast members losing it.
Right.
And you didn't bite, and you didn't give him what he
Yeah.
wants. So that's to your credit, actually.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks. But Andy, yeah, you're right, man. That's exactly what he was trying to do, and he was good at it. To press buttons, there's a place for that, and that's good. But when you start attacking a man, if you're a man and you attack another man, and you raise to that level. That could have went a different way. But yeah, that's it. And you can see that where he was on air, and it was his time to get back at the people who were above him.
Yeah.
Right. Oh
He
yeah,
see
yeah.
what he wanted.
There's
He was just
so
joking.
many.
Come on.
There's so many examples of that, and I'll say this: I tried to get Casey to Rochester for DabbleCon. It would have
He
been
did.
it would have been fucking awesome.
That would have been.
That was going to be my big surprise to have Casey come out and spill the beans. But there were so many videos that we played. There were so many videos we played on that episode. We had Anthony and Missy, and we were chatting about him on the Howard Stern show. And so many times when the programming director's in there and John's just like firing off on all these people, when he would never say any of these things to people if he wasn't on the air, obviously.
Right. That was his cover. That's
no authority.
why he loved to tell on people, and and sometimes it came out great. But you're right. He'd never say stuff like that off the air. And the one thing that I wanted to tell you, which I don't know if you know, but the biggest grifter thing that he ever did was, I told you about this thing in Lotus Notes where there was a group called Group, and that was everybody. That was even interns. They could see everything, right?
Yeah.
And then below that were like the writers and inner kind of people who actually did the production and stuff like that. So John hated it because he wasn't part of that. And that's probably why he didn't do Lotus Notes at all, because if I'm not going to be part of that, see, he wouldn't even get to see what the schedule was because he had nothing to do with it. We would print it out in the morning and give him one. So, hey, 7:30, you got to pick up a phone call from whatever. But as soon as he saw that, he would jockey for position when a comedian came in, so he could go bother them to get them on his Stuttering John and Friends. And this is the most embarrassing and insulting things that you could do to someone who is a professional comedian. You got a guy who is going to take probably 3/4 of the money, put you up on stage for half the time. He'll have two people. They'll both do 35, 40 or whatever. John does 5 minutes and a beer guzzling at the end of the show, and is going to take home 2 times that you will. I'm talking about somebody like Artie or a Nick DiPaolo, or someone who is Michael Jordan of stand-up comedy, and John would just wait to see a copy of the schedule or try and sneak a copy so he could see what people were coming in, because he had nothing to do with booking it.
Yeah. Are you sure you just didn't know how to use Lotus Notes?
I think that's very. He never bothered to learn, for sure.
Yeah.
But it's funny you bring that up, Casey, because we've been documenting this on our Patreon. If you listen, we have another Patreon episode coming up in a couple of weeks of another installment of Easy for You to Say. And one of the things that John talks about in his book, and he brags about it, is how much money he would pay Nick DiPaolo or Jim Florentine or Modi or Jim Norton, any of these guys that was on this Stuttering John and Friends tour. And he brags about how he would take most of the money and did very little of the work. Because he would go out there, do
And he
7
stole money
minutes.
from
He
them.
wasn't a stand-up. He admits
he got
that
the
in his
check.
book. He wasn't
He got
good
the
at it back
checks and he
then.
didn't pay him.
And could you imagine, Casey, you have a Nick DiPaolo who's a pro, who's got an act, a name for himself, everything going on. He's just like, yeah, I'd love to be on the Stuttering John and Friends tour. There's going to be all these Howard Stern fans. It's going to be great. And then years later, John's writing in his book, yeah, and Nick DiPaolo was worth, like, I don't know, $1,500 a weekend. Meanwhile, I took 20 grand. You're like, what the fuck?
You put that number out there too. Oh, it's so insulting, and it bothers me too, because at the same time, like I guess we were starting to do stand-up at the same time. And I went, to the New York Comedy Club, and, I sucked at it, but I wanted to get better. So at night I would go do it, John didn't put the time in because, you suck for the first 5-6 years or whatever.
Sure.
And that's where I met Florentine and I met Levy, and I brought them, and we used to go every weekend. And you would learn from people who knew how to do it, not from an ego where you think that you are equal to these people who have surpassed you and are professionals at what they do. It's like saying to a plumber, hey, you don't know what the hell you're doing. Let me use my hand. And it's ridiculous.
I feel like it's akin to like being a show promoter and like booking it. And this is the talent,
Yep.
and you're doling in this amount out. It would be like if Sharon Osbourne was going around saying, "Oh, I opened for Motley Crue and Ozzy."
right.
It's just like
You're right.
You were just there.